The winter wind howled through Shadowpine Gorge like a hungry wolf, but the man, kneeling by the frozen creek, barely seemed to notice. His buckskin coat was worn at the edges, his hands rough from apparent years of prospecting. Yet anyone watching closely might have noticed how those hands never quite trembled in the bitter cold, how his storm-grey eyes constantly scanned the ridgelines with military precision. The few residents of Shadowpine who bothered to wonder about Ezra Stones past assumed he was just another wandering prospector seeking his fortune. They would soon learn how wrong they were. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Frost-painted Shadowpine Gorge's towering cliffs in glittering white as Ezra Stone methodically worked his mining claim in the grey dawn light. His movements were precise, each sweep of the pan calculated, though a careful observer might have noticed those same hands bore calluses more consistent with handling weapons than mining tools. At 48, Stone had the lean, weathered look of someone who'd spent most of their life in the wilderness, but there was something in those storm-grey eyes that suggested far more dangerous pursuits than mere prospecting. His claim, nestled in the most remote corner of Colorado's Shadowpine district, had yielded enough silver over the past year to keep most men satisfied. But satisfaction wasn't what had drawn Stone to this lonely stretch of wilderness. The harsh winter of 1882 had brought more than just fortune-seekers to the high country. Rumors of rich strikes in the nearby mountains had attracted a darker element, men who preferred taking silver to mining it. Stone's cabin sat apart from the other claims, tucked into a narrow box canyon that most prospectors had dismissed as worthless. Unlike the hasty shelters thrown up by other miners, his cabin was built with the careful attention of someone who understood defensive positions. The thick logs contained concealed rifle ports, and the location offered clear fields of fire along both approaches to the canyon. The sound of hoofbeats drew his attention. Through a system of polished tin sheets positioned as mirrors, supposedly to bring more light into his cabin, Stone observed young Thomas Wu approaching on his sure-footed mountain pony. The boy made regular deliveries to the more remote claims, carrying supplies and news from his father's general store in Shadowpine Settlement. "Evening, Mr. Stone," Thomas called out, leading his pony carefully across the icy ground. "Bring your supplies, coffee, ammunition, and those special mining journals you ordered from Denver." Stone straightened slowly, his movements deliberately, stiff like a man feeling the aches of hard labor. It was an act he'd perfected over the past year, part of a carefully constructed identity. "Much obliged, Thomas. How are things in town?" The boy's usually cheerful face darkened. "Not good, sir. The Richardson brothers' claim got hit last night. They weren't there when it happened, but everything was destroyed. Equipment smashed, and cabin burned. That's the third raid this month." Stone nodded slowly, though his mind was already cataloguing details with the sharp precision that had once made him the most effective agent in the Treasury Department's Secret Service division. "These raiders, has anyone gotten a good look at them?" "Mr. Richardson said he saw them riding away. 6 men, led by someone they're calling the Colonel. Wears an old Confederate officer's coat, carries a gold-handled Colt. Word is they used to ride with Quantrill's raiders during the war before things got too hot in Kansas." Something flickered in Stone's eyes. The Colonel and his band had been his last case before walking away from the Secret Service 2 years ago. A bloody affair that had left him with a bullet scar in his shoulder and a deep weariness for the violence that had defined his life. He'd chosen this remote claim specifically to leave that world behind. "Best be getting back before dark," Stone said, pressing a small silver nugget into the boy's hand. "Trail gets treacherous after sunset, with all this ice." As Thomas disappeared around the bend, Stone moved with a speed and grace that belied his earlier performance. Inside his cabin, beneath a carefully concealed trapdoor, lay the tools of his former trade. A matched pair of custom Colt Navy revolvers, a Treasury Department badge he'd never officially surrendered, and a leather-bound journal filled with the kind of detailed intelligence that had helped him track some of the West's most dangerous criminals. Stone had spent 12 years as one of the Treasury Department's most effective agents, earning a reputation that made hardened outlaws fear the mere mention of his name. His methods hadn't always aligned with official procedures, but they produced results. The same strategic mind that had brought down bank robbers and counterfeiters had served him well as a prospector, helping him identify promising claims that others missed. The sound of approaching horses drew his attention. Through his mirror system, Stone observed 3 riders moving slowly along the creek, their manner suggesting casual interest. But he noted how they studied the terrain, how their hands stayed close to their weapons, scouts most likely assessing his claim's defenses. Stone allowed himself a grim smile as he began his preparations. He'd chosen this location carefully, spending months developing contingency plans for exactly this situation. The raiders would come, probably within the next few days. They'd expect to find a solitary prospector, perhaps a bit more organized than most, but still an easy target. What they'd discover instead was a man who'd spent his life understanding how criminals thought, who could anticipate their moves because he'd spent years tracking men exactly like them. The peaceful prospector was a role Stone had played convincingly, but beneath that facade lay the strategic mind that had made him a legend in the Treasury Department. As night settled over Shadow Pine Gorge, Ezra Stone reviewed his defenses with the same methodical attention he'd once given to planning operations against some of the nation's most notorious gangs. The raiders would come expecting an easy target. They'd learned too late that they'd stumbled onto the claim of a man who'd made his real fortune not in silver, but in bringing men like them to justice. In his hidden basement room, Stone opened his journal, adding notes about the scouts he'd observed. Every detail mattered: the way they rode, the weapons they carried, their apparent level of professional experience. These weren't ordinary claim jumpers. Their movements showed military-style training, and the reference to the colonel suggested something bigger than simple robbery. The lamplight caught the silver star of his treasury badge, still gleaming after 2 years in hiding. Stone had walked away from that life, seeking peace in the solitude of the high country, but peace, it seemed, had other plans. Dawn broke harsh and cold over Shadow Pine Gorge as the first real signs of trouble emerged. Through his carefully positioned mirrors, Stone watched an unusual amount of activity along the main trail. Riders moving in small groups, all strangers, all heavily armed. More telling was how they traveled: military formation, maintaining clear sight lines, professional scouts ranging ahead. The temperature had dropped sharply overnight, leaving frost so thick it looked like snow. Stone used the bitter cold to his advantage, maintaining his prospector's facade by working his claim in short bursts, appearing to seek shelter from the wind while actually observing the newcomer's movements through his surveillance system. "Mr. Stone!" Thomas Wu's urgent whisper caught his attention. The boy had approached through a hidden drawer, using a route Stone had carefully shown him months ago. "They're in town. 6 of them, led by the man in the Confederate coat. They've taken over the Silver Dollar Saloon, but they're not acting like ordinary outlaws." "How so?" Stone kept his voice casual while noting the boy's subtle signs of fear. "They're organized, posted guards at both ends of the street, sent men to watch the telegraph office, and they're asking questions, specific ones, about claim boundaries, shipping schedules, assay records." Stone's mind catalogued these details. With practiced efficiency, this wasn't random raiding. It showed planning, intelligence gathering, strategic thinking. "Your father's store. Have they visited it yet?" "No, sir, but they sent someone to watch it." A man who tries to look like a regular customer but never buys anything. Through his mirrors, Stone caught movement along the ridge. Another pair of riders, these ones moving with the careful precision of experienced scouts. They were mapping approaches, likely preparing for larger operations. A sharp crack echoed across the gorge, a rifle shot. Stone's practiced ear recognized the sound of a Sharps 50, a weapon favored by professional gunmen. Through his observation system, he spotted smoke rising from the direction of the Martinez claim. The old Mexican miner had been one of the first to welcome Stone to Shadow Pine, sharing valuable information about the area's history and hidden trails. "Stay here," Stone instructed Thomas, moving with the fluid grace of a man who'd spent years in combat. His prospector's stiff movements vanished as he retrieved a Spencer carbine from a hidden cache. Through his mirrors, he observed 3 riders approaching Martinez's cabin, their movements suggesting they expected no resistance. They were wrong. Stone's first shot took their leader's hat off, deliberately missing flesh, but sending an unmistakable message. The riders scattered, showing trained reactions that confirmed his suspicions about their military background. "Mr. Martinez," Stone called out. "Your property or theirs?" "Mio," came the answering shout. "They demand I sell, offer a poor price, then try to frighten me when I refuse." Stone noted how quickly the riders regrouped, taking covered positions with practiced efficiency. Not common bandits. These men had formal training. Through his mirrors, he spotted more movement, reinforcements approaching from multiple directions, using classic cavalry flanking maneuvers. "Thomas," Stone whispered, "take the hidden trail back to town. Tell your father what you've seen, but carefully. They're watching his store for a reason." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. As the boy slipped away, Stone observed the raiders' response to his intervention. Instead of pressing the attack, they withdrew in good order, maintaining coverage of each other's movements. Professional restraint, they were probing defenses, gathering intelligence, planning something bigger. Through his surveillance system, Stone tracked their return to town. They rode straight to the Silver Dollar, where a tall figure in a Confederate officer's coat waited on the porch. Even at this distance, Stone recognized Colonel Marcus Blackwood, though they'd never met face to face. The colonel's reputation spoke of a brilliant but ruthless commander who turned his military expertise to organized crime after the war. That evening, Stone made a show of working his claim until sunset, appearing to any watchers like a cautious but unremarkable prospector. But as darkness fell, he moved silently through a series of hidden positions he'd prepared during his first months in Shadow Pine. The town had changed subtly, but significantly. Armed men patrolled the streets in pairs, maintaining clear lines of sight. The telegraph office was dark, no messages going in or out. Most telling was the lamp still burning in the assayer's office, where shadows moved, suggesting men searching through records. Stone's mind worked with the same sharp precision that had made him legendary in the Treasury Department. The raiders' pattern suggested something far more organized than simple claim jumping. They were gathering information, establishing control of communications, setting up for a larger operation. A soft whistle caught his attention, the signal he'd arranged with Sarah Wu, Thomas's older sister. The young woman had inherited her mother's American intelligence and her father's careful attention to detail, making her an invaluable source of information. "They've been reviewing shipping records," she whispered, joining him in a concealed location behind her father's store. "Particularly interested in silver shipments going out through Marshall's Freight Company, and they're asking about property deeds, claim registrations, water rights." Stone's suspicions deepened. This level of intelligence gathering suggested something beyond ordinary banditry. The colonel was preparing for something bigger, possibly a systematic takeover of the entire mining district. "There's more," Sarah continued. That man they posted to watch our store. He's not just watching, he's nothing to everyone who comes and goes, especially miners buying supplies, creating some kind of list. Through carefully positioned observation, points, Stone watched the colonel's men continuing their preparations. They'd established a clear command structure with different teams handling specific tasks: surveillance, intelligence gathering, security. Their efficiency spoke of extensive military experience. A flicker of movement caught his attention. 3 men approaching the assayer's office well after closing time. Their manner suggested official business, but Stone noted telling details. The way they moved in formation, how they covered angles of approach, their practiced handling of weapons partially concealed under heavy coats. "They're looking for something specific," he murmured, more to himself than Sarah. "Documents, records, anything that shows legal ownership of claims and water rights." Sarah's quick mind grasped the implications. If they control the official records, they control the territory, Stone finished. Mining claims are only as good as the papers proving ownership. Destroy or alter those records. Through his surveillance system, Stone observed more of the colonel's men arriving in small groups, establishing themselves throughout Shadowpine with tactical precision. They weren't just setting up for a raid, they were preparing for an occupation. In his hidden basement room, Stone reviewed his own carefully gathered intelligence. The leather journal contained detailed maps of the area, including features that didn't appear on official surveys: hidden trails, abandoned mine shafts, underground watercourses. He'd spent months documenting every aspect of Shadowpine Gorge, preparing for the day when his past might catch up with him. Now those preparations would serve a different purpose. The colonel's operation showed all the hallmarks of military precision, but that same precision could become a weakness if properly exploited. Stone had spent years studying how military tactics could be turned against those who employed them. A distant owl call drew his attention. Not quite natural, a signal being passed between the colonel's men. Through his mirrors, Stone spotted movement on the ridge above his claim, observers taking up positions, likely mapping approaches for a future assault. Let them watch, he thought grimly. Let them see what they expect to see. A solitary prospector, perhaps a bit more careful than most, but still an easy target. They'd learned too late that they'd stumbled onto the claim of someone who understood their methods better than they did themselves. As midnight approached, Stone made final adjustments to his observation systems. The colonel's next move would reveal much about his larger plans. But one thing was already clear. Shadowpine Gorge was about to become a battlefield, though not the kind its residents might expect. This conflict would be won, not through simple violence, but through careful strategy and precise intelligence. And in that kind of battle, a former Treasury agent might just have the advantage over even the most disciplined military commander. Through his carefully positioned mirrors, Stone noticed another significant detail. Several of the colonel's men were carrying surveying equipment. Not the usual tools of bandits, but precisely what you'd need if you were planning to redraw property lines and claim boundaries. Near the edge of town, he observed an interesting interaction. One of the colonel's lieutenants was meeting with Jacob Foster, the local banker. Foster's agitated gestures and nervous glances suggested coercion rather than willing cooperation. Stone made a mental note. Control of banking records would be crucial for any attempt to legitimize illegal property seizures. The sound of breaking glass drew his attention to the newspaper office. Through his observation system, he watched 3 of the colonel's men systematically destroying the printing press. Another strategic move, eliminating the possibility of public notices or warnings being distributed to neighboring communities. "Mr. Stone," a soft voice called from the shadows. Old Miguel Martinez approached carefully, using the concealment techniques Stone had taught him. "My cousin works at the stage depot in Silver Creek. Says more men are coming, professionals from Denver, the kind that mining companies hire when they want problems to disappear quietly." This information added another piece to the puzzle. The colonel wasn't just leading a gang of raiders, he was assembling an army of specialists. Each new arrival brought specific skills: surveyors to alter boundaries, gunmen for enforcement, experts in property law to create a veneer of legitimacy. Through the gathering darkness, Stone watched Shadowpine's transformation accelerating. The colonel's men were establishing a subtle but comprehensive control over the town's key functions: communications, transportation, legal records, banking. It was the kind of systematic takeover Stone had seen before, during his Treasury Department days, investigating organized criminal enterprises masquerading as legitimate businesses. A flash of lamplight from the assayer's office caught his attention. Through his mirrors, he observed men carefully packing documents into wooden crates. They weren't destroying records, they were preserving them, probably to create fraudulent versions that would support whatever claims the colonel planned to make. Stone's strategic mind analyzed these developments with practiced efficiency. The colonel's operation showed sophisticated planning, but that same sophistication created opportunities. Complex operations required coordination, and coordination could be disrupted if you understood the underlying patterns. As midnight approached, Stone made his way back to his cabin through a series of hidden routes he'd prepared months ago. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but tonight had revealed crucial information about his opponent's methods and intentions. The quiet prospector had indeed chosen his seemingly isolated claim carefully. Now it would become the base for a very different kind of mining operation, one that would extract intelligence instead of silver. As morning frost coated Shadowpine Gorge, Stone activated the first phase of preparations he'd spent months perfecting. Using a series of carefully positioned signal mirrors, he initiated contact with a network few would have suspected existed in this remote mining district. High above his claim, Rebecca Hawkins adjusted her telescope from the hidden observation post Stone had helped her establish. The young widow had come west, seeking a fresh start after the war, establishing a modest homestead that offered perfect views of every major trail into Shadowpine. For the past year, she'd been meticulously documenting traffic patterns, identifying regular travelers, and noting strangers. "East Ridge is active," she signaled, using the heliograph technique Stone had taught her. 4 men setting up some kind of equipment. Look at the military, not miners. In his concealed basement room, Stone unrolled a detailed topographical map covered in careful annotations. Each marking represented a strategic position, supply cache, or escape route he'd established during his first months in Shadowpine. The colonel's men were inadvertently positioning themselves exactly where Stone had anticipated potential threats. It would emerge. A subtle tap on his door, 3 quick, 2 slow, identified Sarah Wu before she entered. She carried a heavy ledger from her father's store, but not the official one shown to casual observers. This volume contained a different kind of accounting, detailed records of who bought mining supplies, in what quantities, and when. Patterns that might reveal which claims were truly productive and which were merely fronts. "They're planning something for tonight," Sarah reported softly. "One of their men got drunk at the Silver Dollar, mentioned something about testing defenses." Through his mirror system, Stone observed increased activity around the colonel's headquarters. Men were checking weapons with professional efficiency, but more telling was the surveying equipment being prepared. They weren't just planning a raid, they were preparing to document whatever they found. A flicker of movement caught his attention. Using his carefully positioned observation points, Stone watched Miguel Martinez, apparently struggling with a broken wagon wheel near the assayer's office. The old miner's performance was convincing, but Stone noted how his position offered a perfect view of the building's interior. The day brought more revelations about Stone's carefully established network. Thomas Wu's regular deliveries had created a detailed map of every claim's defensive preparations. Rebecca Hawkins' homestead served as a central observation post, coordinating intelligence from multiple sources. The Wu family store functioned as both a supply depot and information clearinghouse. Even Stone's apparently isolated claim served a deeper purpose. Its remote location and difficult approach routes had discouraged casual visitors, allowing him to establish an operational base without drawing attention. The cabin's carefully constructed defenses weren't just for protection. They were designed to channel potential attackers into predictable patterns. Sarah's voice drew his attention back to immediate concerns. They've posted men at every major trail junction. No one enters or leaves Shadowpine without being observed. Stone nodded thoughtfully. The colonel's men were establishing classic military control points, but their very professionalism made them predictable. Through his basement's concealed observation ports, he watched their patrols moving with practiced precision. "Let them think they control the obvious routes," he murmured. "They don't know about the old silver smuggling trails." This revealed another layer of Stone's preparations. During his early months in Shadowpine, he'd cultivated relationships with the district's Mexican and Chinese miners. Both communities had maintained hidden transportation networks, developed during years when discrimination forced them to find alternative routes for moving people and goods. Miguel Martinez appeared silently from a concealed entrance, his previous performance as a struggling wagon driver replaced by focused efficiency. "My people are in position," he reported. "Every major canyon, every water source. We watch them all." Stone's strategic mind processed this information. The colonel's men were professionals, but they were outsiders trying to control unfamiliar terrain. His own network had spent months, some members years, learning every detail of Shadowpine's complex geography. Through careful preparation, Stone had transformed the entire district into an intelligence-gathering mechanism. Rebecca's homestead provided high-ground surveillance. The Wu family store collected economic intelligence. Martinez's people monitored remote areas. Even the local saloon served a purpose. Stone had quietly arranged for several retired scouts to take jobs there, positioning them to observe visitors. While appearing to be simple laborers, a signal from one of his mirrors caught Stone's attention. Through the carefully positioned network, he observed new developments at the colonel's headquarters. Men were unloading specialized equipment, not just weapons, but tools for forging documents, altering survey markers, and creating fraudulent claim registrations. In his hidden basement room, Stone reviewed the detailed documentation he'd gathered over the past year. Each piece had been carefully selected and preserved, creating a record that could expose not just illegal activities, but systematic fraud. The quiet prospector had been mining something far more valuable than silver. He'd been extracting evidence. Sarah returned with fresh intelligence from town. The colonel's men had spent the afternoon questioning miners about claim boundaries and water rights, but more telling was what they didn't ask about. They showed no interest in actual mining operations. "They're preparing for something bigger than a simple raid," Stone concluded. "This level of preparation, the focus on documentation. They're planning to take control of the entire district through quasi-legal means." Through his observation system, he watched the colonel personally inspecting his men's positions. Even at this distance, Stone could recognize the tactical expertise behind their deployment. They were establishing interlocking fields of fire, covering every apparent approach to key locations. But Stone's network had additional advantages. The Mexican miners had generations of experience hiding from authorities, developing techniques for moving unseen through difficult terrain. The Chinese community had created subtle systems of communication that outsiders rarely noticed. Even the town's women, often overlooked by newcomers, had established their own information-sharing networks. Rebecca's signal mirror flashed another update. The colonel's men were setting up more sophisticated surveillance equipment on the ridgelines. Their military training was evident in their positioning, but that same training created blind spots. They focused on obvious tactical positions, missing the subtle observation posts Stone's network had established in seemingly worthless locations. As evening approached, Stone made final adjustments to his preparations. Each member of his network understood their role in the coming conflict. It wouldn't be won through simple violence. Victory would require careful coordination of intelligence and resources. The quiet prospector had indeed spent months preparing for this moment, but not in ways the colonel's men would expect. Stone's true preparation hadn't been in stockpiling weapons or fortifying positions, but in creating a comprehensive system for gathering and using information. Through his mirror network, Stone observed increased activity around Shadowpine. The colonel's men were clearly preparing for some kind of operation, but their very professionalism made them predictable. Military training created specific patterns of behavior, patterns that could be anticipated and countered by someone who understood them. As darkness settled over the gorge, Stone reviewed his network's capabilities one final time. The colonel was about to discover that taking control of a mining district required more than military precision and armed men. Some defenses weren't visible, some resources couldn't be measured, and some preparations had been months in the making. The quiet prospector had transformed Shadowpine itself into a weapon, not through force, but through careful preparation and strategic positioning. Now it was time to show the colonel's men the true value of patience and planning. Through his carefully concealed observation ports, Stone noted another crucial development. Catherine Henderson, the telegraph operator's wife, was hanging laundry. In a specific pattern, whites and colors arranged in what appeared to be random order. To most observers, it would seem unremarkable, but Stone recognized it as the coded signal they'd arranged months ago. The colonel's men had finally made their first major mistake. 3 of them visited the county recorder's office in Silver Creek. Sarah translated the message later. They're looking for the original survey maps from before the war. This information confirmed Stone's analysis of their strategy. The colonel wasn't just planning to take claims by force. He was preparing to challenge their legal validity, probably using discrepancies between pre-war and post-war surveys to create confusion about rightful ownership. Through his mirror system, Stone observed another telling detail. The colonel's men had begun taking detailed measurements between existing claim markers, particularly around the older Mexican and Chinese mines. These operations had been established before official surveys, their boundaries marked by traditional methods rather than formal documentation. They think they've found a weakness, Miguel Martinez noted, joining Stone in the hidden basement, but they don't know about the old stones. This revealed another layer of Stone's preparations. During his early months in Shadowpine, he'd worked with Martinez to document the traditional boundary markers used by the first miners, stones carved with symbols that predated official surveys. These markers, combined with witness testimonies from longtime residents, could legally establish prior claims under territorial law. A subtle signal from Rebecca's observation post drew Stone's attention to new activity along the eastern ridge. The colonel's men were setting up what appeared to be scientific equipment, barometers, theodolites, and other surveying tools. But Stone's trained eye noticed they were positioning them with military precision, creating a network of observation. Posts disguised as survey stations. "They're mapping more than just claims," he murmured, studying their positions through his specialized mirrors. "They're establishing artillery reference points." This suggested the colonel had even bigger plans than they'd initially suspected. He wasn't just preparing to take over existing mines, he was positioning for a sustained occupation of the entire district. The survey equipment provided perfect cover for placing men in tactically advantageous positions. But Stone's network had already anticipated and countered this strategy. Rebecca's homestead wasn't just an observation post, it was the center of a sophisticated counter-surveillance system. Her telescope was complemented by carefully positioned mirrors that could redirect sunlight to blind observers at those very positions the colonel's men were establishing. Through the afternoon, more elements of Stone's preparations came to light. The Wu family's delivery routes had created more than just an intelligence network. They'd established a system for moving supplies and information that bypassed all major trails. The Mexican miners' traditional boundary markers didn't just establish legal claims. They also marked hidden paths through the mountains that no military survey would detect. Even Stone's seemingly isolated claim served multiple strategic purposes. Its position at the head of Shadowpine Gorge made it appear vulnerable, but the surrounding cliffs contained dozens of small caves. Each had been carefully stocked with supplies and connected by hidden passages, creating a complex network that could support extended operations without relying on visible supply lines. As evening shadows lengthened across the gorge, Stone made final adjustments to his observation system. The colonel's men were clearly preparing for something significant, but their very thoroughness worked against them. Each new position they established, each survey point they created, fit perfectly into the defensive network Stone had spent months preparing. The quiet prospector had indeed transformed Shadowpine into a weapon, but not in ways the colonel's men would understand until it was too late. Some preparations weren't visible on any survey, some strengths couldn't be measured by military instruments, and some advantages came from understanding the land in ways that went beyond maps and markers. The colonel made his move at noon, when the winter sun cast the shortest shadows over Shadowpine Gorge. His timing was deliberate. Choosing broad daylight demonstrated absolute confidence, a message that he had nothing to fear from legal authorities or local resistance. Through his observation system, Stone watched the operation unfold with professional appreciation for its precision. 30 riders emerged from the Silver Dollar, splitting into smaller units with practiced efficiency. Each group had specific objectives, moving with the coordination that came from extensive military experience. The first target was the assayer's office. 6 men dismounted smoothly, posting guards at strategic positions while others entered the building. Their approach suggested they expected no resistance. The colonel had already ensured the assayer himself was conveniently absent, called away by an emergency message about his sister in Denver. "They're not just taking records," Sarah Wu reported through their concealed communication system. "They're replacing them. 3 men with document cases just went in through the back door." Stone noted this detail with grim satisfaction. The colonel wasn't simply destroying evidence. He was creating a paper trail to legitimize whatever actions would follow. It was sophisticated, professional, and exactly the kind of operation that had made him notorious during the war. Simultaneously, another group secured the bank. Jacob Foster, the banker, offered token protest, but quickly yielded when presented with official documents bearing territorial government seals. Stone's trained eye, watching through carefully positioned mirrors, recognized expert forgery work. The first colonel himself led the main force toward the largest active mining operation, the Shadowpine Consolidated Mining Company's new shaft. His men moved in textbook military formation, but Stone noticed they carried more than weapons. Surveyors' equipment, legal documents, and official-looking badges suggested this was meant to appear as a legitimate government action. "Morning, gentlemen." The colonel's voice carried clearly across the mining yard, cultured tones suggesting education and refinement. "I represent the Territorial Mining Commission's Special Enforcement Division. We've received reports of serious safety violations and claim boundary irregularities." The mining company's foreman, a burly man named Henderson, stepped forward. "We've had no notification of any inspection. If you'll just wait while I contact the main office." "I'm afraid that won't be possible." The colonel's smile remained pleasant as his men systematically surrounded the area. "We have evidence of immediate danger to public safety. These documents authorize immediate cessation of all mining activities pending a full investigation." Stone observed the operation with growing concern. The colonel's strategy was more sophisticated than expected. By presenting himself as a government official enforcing safety regulations, he created confusion about who could legitimately resist his actions. Through his mirror network, Stone watched similar scenes playing out across Shadow Pine. Each major claim received a visit from polite, well-dressed men carrying official-looking documents. Some cited safety violations, others questioned claim boundaries or water rights. The specific pretext varied, but the result was the same: systematic shutdown of all major mining operations. More telling was what Stone observed happening simultaneously in less visible locations. Teams of men were quietly replacing claim markers, adjusting survey points, and documenting everything with professional precision. The colonel wasn't just seizing control, he was creating a comprehensive record that would support his actions if challenged legally. "Mr. Stone!" Thomas Wu's urgent whisper carried from a concealed position. "They've posted armed men at every road out of the district. They're turning back any miners who try to leave, saying it's for their own safety until the investigation is complete." This matched Stone's analysis of the colonel's methods. By controlling movement in and out of Shadow Pine, he could prevent word of his actions from spreading to outside authorities. More importantly, it kept claim owners from gathering evidence that might contradict his fraudulent documentation. The operation's sophistication became clearer as Stone observed its next phase. Teams of surveyors, protected by armed guards, began systematic measurements throughout the district. They appeared to be conducting legitimate safety inspections, but Stone recognized they were actually documenting existing claim markers before their colleagues could replace them with altered versions. Through carefully hidden observation ports, Stone watched the colonel personally directing operations from a command post established on the bank's second floor. His position offered clear views of the main street while remaining partially concealed from casual observation. More importantly, it placed him next to the bank's telegraph office, allowing him to monitor all official communications. "They've got men watching every major claim owner's home," Rebecca Hawkins reported through their signal system. "Not obviously. They're posing as concerned neighbors, warning people to stay inside until the unsafe conditions are resolved." Stone's strategic mind analyzed the pattern. The colonel's operation showed all the hallmarks of military psychological operations: controlling information, isolating potential resistance, creating uncertainty about who represented legitimate authority. It was the same sophisticated approach that had made him so effective during the war. A commotion near the Wu family store drew Stone's attention. Through his mirrors, he observed 3 of the colonel's men conducting what appeared to be a routine inspection, but their positioning was tactical. One engaging Mr. Wu in conversation, while others systematically noted everyone entering or leaving the store. "They're identifying community leaders," Stone murmured, "anyone who others turn to for guidance or information." Sarah Wu, observing from a concealed position, confirmed this assessment. "They're especially interested in who talks to whom. One of them is making detailed notes about relationships and connections." This revealed another layer of the colonel's strategy. By mapping social networks within Shadowpine, he could identify potential sources of organized resistance before they materialized. It was the kind of thorough intelligence gathering that separated professional military operations from simple banditry. Through the afternoon, Stone watched the colonel's control of Shadowpine steadily tighten. Each action appeared legitimate on the surface. Safety inspections, document reviews, claim surveys, but together they amounted to a comprehensive takeover of the entire district. More concerning was how the colonel's men handled anyone who questioned their authority. No violence, no overt threats, just polite suggestions about the legal consequences of interfering with official investigations. Their restraint actually enhanced their effectiveness, making resistance seem unreasonable or even criminal. They're starting to escort critical witnesses to the hotel, Miguel Martinez reported through their hidden communication system. Claim owners, business leaders, anyone who might organize opposition. All very polite, very official, protective. Custody during the investigation. Stone noted how the colonel's men had systematically isolated potential resistance leaders while maintaining perfect deniability. Each person was technically free to leave, but doing so would mean abandoning their property and appearing to obstruct a legitimate government investigation. Through his observation network, Stone watched the colonel personally reviewing progress reports from his various teams. His command style showed the same attention to detail that had made him a legendary cavalry officer. Every action documented, every contingency planned for, every potential problem anticipated and addressed. As evening approached, Shadowpine had been transformed. The colonel's men controlled all major buildings, monitored all significant movement, and possessed apparently official documentation for every action they'd taken. More importantly, they'd created an atmosphere of uncertainty that paralyzed potential resistance. Stone observed all this through his carefully positioned surveillance system, noting how the colonel's operation demonstrated sophistication far beyond ordinary criminality. This wasn't just a takeover, it was a complete restructuring of power in the district, done with such precision that many residents weren't even sure if they should resist. The quiet prospector had indeed chosen his ground carefully. As darkness settled over Shadowpine Gorge, Stone reviewed the day's developments with the same strategic mind that had made him legendary in the Treasury Department. The colonel's power move had revealed crucial information about his methods, capabilities, and objectives. Most importantly, it had shown that this conflict wouldn't be won through simple force. The colonel's strength lay in creating confusion about legitimate authority. Defeating him would require more than weapons. It would take careful strategy and precise timing to expose the truth behind his seemingly official facade. Through his mirror system, Stone observed another layer of the colonel's operation unfolding as night approached. Teams of men were systematically visiting the smaller claims, particularly those owned by Mexican and Chinese miners. Their approach was different here, less official, more directly threatening. They know these miners might not have perfect documentation, Sarah Wu reported, her voice tight with anger. They're offering to help regularize claim papers in exchange for signing new partnerships. Stone watched through carefully positioned observation points as the colonel's men presented their ultimatum to elderly Wong Chen, who had worked his small claim for 15 years. The document they wanted him to sign looked official, but Stone's trained eye noticed telltale signs of sophisticated forgery. The operation's timing revealed another aspect of the colonel's strategic thinking. By moving against the marginalized miners after establishing his official presence, he made it harder for them to challenge his authority. Who would believe their complaints against an apparent government official? Through the gathering darkness, Stone noted increased activity around the assayer's office. The colonel's men were now processing ore samples, but their attention seemed focused more on documenting production levels than actual assaying. They were creating a paper trail, establishing official records of each claim's value. They've started questioning miners about hidden strikes, Thomas Wu whispered from his concealed position, offering amnesty for any undeclared discoveries if people cooperate with the investigation. This revealed another sophisticated aspect of the Colonel's strategy. By promising to overlook minor violations, he created incentives for miners to provide information voluntarily. Each confession could later be used as leverage for his larger operation. Stone's strategic mind analyzed these developments with growing concern. The Colonel wasn't just taking physical control of Shadowpine. He was systematically gathering intelligence about every valuable claim while creating legal documentation to support his actions. As full darkness settled over the gorge, Stone observed the final phase of the day's operation. The Colonel's men began establishing permanent observation posts throughout the district, each positioned to monitor key locations while maintaining the appearance of official security patrols. The quiet prospector had indeed witnessed a masterful display of military precision transformed into sophisticated criminality. But Stone's trained eye had noted crucial details that others might miss, patterns that revealed vulnerabilities. In the Colonel's seemingly perfect operation, tomorrow would begin the careful work of exploiting those weaknesses, but tonight had shown exactly what they were facing. Not just an outlaw band, but a precisely organized operation designed to transform criminal action into apparent legitimate authority. The assembly of Stone's full network began at midnight, in an abandoned silver mine half a mile beneath Shadowpine Gorge. His careful groundwork over the past year had created the foundation. Now it was time to transform individual allies into a coordinated resistance. Through his mirror system, Stone first confirmed the positions of the Colonel's night patrols. Their military precision made their movements predictable, creating perfect windows for his people to move undetected through the darkness. "The old Thompson Tunnel is clear," Rebecca Hawkins signaled from her observation post. "Your guests can proceed according to schedule." One by one, key figures in Shadowpine's community arrived through different hidden routes. Jacob Foster, the banker, came through an abandoned ventilation shaft. Wang Chen used a series of connected cellars beneath the Chinese Quarter. Miguel Martinez guided others through prehistoric mining tunnels, unknown to modern surveys. "Welcome to the real Shadowpine Mining Association," Stone addressed the gathered group, his quiet prospector's persona replaced by the sharp authority of his Treasury Department days. The assembled leaders represented every major faction in the district. Claim owners, merchants, miners, and transporters. Sarah Wu arrived last, bringing crucial intelligence. The Colonel's men are expanding their documentation requirements. They're demanding proof of every transaction, every boundary adjustment, every water rights agreement for the past 20 years. This news caused murmurs among the gathered leaders, but Stone's expression showed grim satisfaction. "They're playing directly into our strategy. The more documentation they demand, the more opportunities we have to introduce strategic confusion." Through carefully positioned mirrors, Stone showed them how his observation network covered the entire district. Each reflection point served multiple purposes, gathering intelligence, coordinating movements, and maintaining secure communication. "Your father's store," he explained to Sarah, "isn't just our information clearinghouse. Its delivery routes create perfect cover for moving people and supplies throughout the district. Every legitimate business transaction can mask a resistance operation." Thomas Wu demonstrated their coded communication system, showing how ordinary business records could transmit complex messages. Purchase orders, delivery receipts, and inventory lists all carried hidden meanings that would appear innocent to the Colonel's investigators. "But we're not just sharing information," Stone continued, revealing more layers of his network. "Each of you brings unique capabilities that properly coordinated, can systematically undermine the colonel's control. Rebecca Hawkins outlined her observation network, explaining how her homestead's elevated position allowed her to coordinate movements across the entire district. Her telescope and signal mirrors provided early warning of the colonel's operations while directing resistance activities. Miguel Martinez described his miner's hidden transportation system: ancient tunnels, forgotten shafts, and concealed passages that bypassed all major trails. These routes, developed over generations of avoiding official attention, could move people and supplies undetected. "My people have always kept two sets of maps," Martinez explained. "Official ones for the mining offices, real ones passed down through families. The colonel's surveyors could spend years here and never find half our passages." Jacob Foster revealed how his banking records had been carefully structured to create strategic confusion. "Every transaction generates multiple paper trails," he detailed. "Each one is legitimate by itself, but together they form patterns that will take experts months to unravel." Wang Chen demonstrated sophisticated methods for marking and moving boundary stones that would evade normal survey techniques. His knowledge, passed down through generations of Chinese miners, allowed them to adjust claim boundaries in ways that would confound even professional surveyors. "These marks," he explained, showing ancient symbols carved into seemingly random rocks, "tell true boundaries, but only if you know how to read them. Colonel's men see just old scratches, meaningless damage." Catherine Henderson, the telegraph operator's wife, outlined their communication network. Regular business messages carried coded information to contacts in neighboring communities, gradually spreading awareness of the colonel's operation while maintaining perfect deniability. Every market price report, every equipment order, every shipping notification contains hidden meaning, she explained. "The colonel's men can monitor every message and find nothing obviously suspicious." Through his carefully hidden observation ports, Stone watched his network begin to coordinate their activities. Each member understood their role in the larger strategy, how their individual actions contributed to systematically undermining the colonel's authority. The Wu family store became their primary coordination center, its legitimate business providing perfect cover for resistance activities. Every customer interaction could carry messages, every delivery could transport supplies, every transaction could support their operation. "Your normal business patterns are our greatest advantage," Stone explained. "The colonel's men are looking for obvious resistance. They won't suspect that routine commercial activities are actually coordinating opposition to their control." Rebecca's signal network expanded to include multiple observation posts throughout the district. Each position appeared to serve normal purposes: homesteads, mining camps, survey points, while actually providing interlocking coverage of all major routes and activities. Martinez's miners began expanding their hidden transportation network, connecting isolated tunnels into a comprehensive system that could move people and supplies anywhere in the district undetected. Each new connection created more options for evading the colonel's patrols. "We're not just hiding from them," Stone emphasized. "We're creating a parallel transportation system that operates completely outside their control. Every move they make above ground can be countered by movement they can't detect below." Foster's banking network started implementing more sophisticated financial strategies. Each transaction generated multiple legitimate records that, taken together, would create mounting confusion about property ownership and claim values. "The colonel's men pride themselves on thorough documentation," Foster noted. "But that thoroughness becomes a weakness when every document they examine leads to more questions than answers." Wang Chen's traditional mining knowledge proved invaluable in creating systematic uncertainty about claim boundaries. His people began subtly adjusting markers throughout the district, using ancient techniques that would baffle modern surveyors. Chinese miners learned long ago, he explained, how to make Earth itself hide truth. What looks like natural formation to American eyes carries meaning for those who know where to look. Catherine's communication network expanded to include multiple layers of coded messages. Regular business telegrams carried hidden meanings, while apparently random commercial inquiries actually coordinated resistance activities across multiple districts. Through his mirror system, Stone observed his network's growing sophistication. Each member brought unique capabilities that, properly coordinated, created something far more powerful than simple resistance. They were building an alternative structure of authority that operated beneath the colonel's apparent control. As dawn approached, Stone reviewed the night's developments with his core team. The quiet prospector's careful preparations had created the foundation for a comprehensive response to military occupation. Now that foundation was growing into something the colonel's men wouldn't expect and couldn't easily counter. Remember, Stone concluded as the meeting ended, our strength isn't in direct confrontation. It's in creating a system they can't effectively fight because they can't fully understand it. Every legitimate business transaction, every normal daily activity can actually serve our larger strategy. Through carefully coordinated departures, each member of the network returned to their normal positions. By sunrise, Shadowpine would appear unchanged on the surface. But beneath that appearance, a sophisticated resistance infrastructure was taking shape. The quiet prospector had indeed built more than just a defensive network. He had created the framework for an alternative organization that could systematically undermine military control through perfectly legitimate daily activities. The colonel was about to discover that some opponents were most dangerous precisely because they appeared least threatening. As the meeting concluded, Stone revealed another layer of his network's capabilities. Elizabeth Carson, the local schoolteacher, stepped forward from the shadows. Her role had been carefully crafted over months of preparation. The children see everything, she explained to the gathered leaders. They play in the streets, run errands, overhear conversations, and no one pays them much attention. Through them, we have eyes and ears everywhere in Shadowpine. Stone's strategic mind had recognized this overlooked resource. Elizabeth had organized a sophisticated intelligence network disguised as simple childhood games. Hopscotch patterns conveyed coded messages, paper airplanes carried hidden notes, and playground rhymes transmitted warnings. Through his mirror system, Stone observed new elements of his network taking shape. Marcus Henderson, the livery stable owner, demonstrated how his regular horse trading business could support their operations. Every horse has distinctive traits, Henderson explained. By carefully selecting which mounts we sell or rent to the colonel's men, we can track their movements through unique hoof prints, riding patterns, and behavior quirks. Maria Suarez, who ran the town's largest boarding house, revealed her contribution to the network. My guests share meals together, swap stories, discuss business, she detailed. Through careful seating arrangements and guided conversations, we can spread specific pieces of information while gathering intelligence about the colonel's operations. Stone's observation system noted how each new element added layers of complexity to their resistance. The colonel's men, looking for obvious opposition, would never suspect that children's games, horse trading, and dinner conversations were actually coordinating sophisticated counter-operations. Rebecca brought fresh intelligence from her observation post. They're establishing new security checkpoints, she reported, but they're focusing on major trails and obvious approaches. They have no idea about our alternative routes. Through carefully hidden observation ports, Stone watched his network's capabilities expand. The town's seamstress, elderly Mrs. Chen, demonstrated how her regular deliveries of mended clothing could carry coded messages sewn into seams and hems. Every stitch pattern means something, she explained, showing intricate needlework that appeared decorative but actually conveyed specific information. And working with clothing from both sides gives me perfect reason to move between the kernels. Men and our people. Even the local minister, Reverend Parker, had a role in Stone's network. His regular pastoral visits provided cover for coordinating resistance activities, while church social events created opportunities for secure meetings disguised as normal community gatherings. The Colonel's men respect church activities, Parker noted. They won't interfere with prayer meetings or social functions. This gives us perfect cover for organizing while maintaining complete deniability. Stone's strategic mind had carefully considered every aspect of small-town life, identifying how normal daily activities could support sophisticated resistance operations. Each legitimate business, each social gathering, each routine transaction could serve multiple purposes. Through his mirror system, he observed these various elements beginning to work together. Children's games carried messages to the boarding house, where dinner conversations spread specific information. Horse trading tracked movement patterns, while mended clothing delivered coded updates. Church socials coordinated activities disguised as community gatherings. Remember, Stone instructed his expanded network, our strength lies in appearing completely ordinary. Every resistance action must be hidden within normal, legitimate activities that the Colonel's men would expect to see in any small mining town. The quiet prospector had indeed assembled more than just a resistance movement. He had created a comprehensive alternative community that could operate freely beneath the surface of apparent military control, using the very normalcy of daily life as its most effective disguise. The Colonel forced the first major confrontation at dawn, but not in the way Stone had expected. Instead of direct violence, he launched a sophisticated legal assault backed by armed force. Through his mirror system, Stone watched teams of men moving simultaneously throughout Shadow Pine, each carrying official-looking documents and supported by armed guards. They're serving papers on every major claim, Sarah Wu reported, rushing into Stone's hidden command post. Eviction notices, cease and desist orders, official condemnations, all citing safety violations and boundary disputes. Stone's strategic mind analyzed this development. The Colonel was leveraging his false authority to create an appearance of legitimate legal action. Each document appeared to come from different territorial offices, creating a web of overlapping jurisdictions that would confuse any immediate resistance. Through carefully positioned observation points, he watched the operation unfold. The Colonel's men moved with military precision, but their approach revealed a crucial weakness. They were targeting properties in order of apparent value, focusing on the most productive claims first. Implement the switchback strategy, Stone instructed through his network's communication system. This triggered a carefully prepared response that would turn the Colonel's own tactics against him. Jacob Foster initiated the first phase from the bank. As the Colonel's men presented their documents, he began raising specific legal questions about jurisdiction and authority. Each inquiry was perfectly legitimate, requiring formal responses that would force them to reveal more details about their supposed official standing. They're getting tangled in their own paperwork, Rebecca signaled from her observation post. Every answer they give contradicts something in their previous documents. Meanwhile, Wang Chen's people began implementing another element of Stone's strategy. As the Colonel's men approached Chinese-owned claims with their official papers, they encountered elderly miners who spoke no English. Each interaction required finding translators, leading to delays and confusion. Through his mirror system, Stone observed the Colonel's frustration mounting. His men were trained for decisive action, not complex legal negotiations in multiple languages. The very precision of their military approach made them vulnerable to carefully planned bureaucratic obstruction. Now, Stone signaled to Miguel Martinez. The Mexican miners began presenting their own documentation, ancient Spanish land grants, Mexican territorial claims, and complicated water rights agreements. Each document appeared legitimate, but raised new legal questions that required investigation. The confrontation shifted to the assayer's office, where the colonel's men attempted to seize official records. But Stone had prepared for this moment. Through carefully coordinated action, his network had created multiple sets of documentation, each technically legitimate but collectively contradictory. They're finding 3 different boundary surveys for every major claim, Sarah reported, watching through concealed observation ports. Each one properly certified, each showing different measurements. Stone's Treasury Department experience had taught him that sophisticated opponents were often most vulnerable to their own methods. The colonel was using official documentation to justify his takeover. Now that same documentation was becoming a weapon against him. Through the morning, the confrontation escalated in complexity rather than violence. Elizabeth Carson's schoolchildren, playing their seemingly innocent games, spread specific pieces of information throughout Shadowpine. Their playground messages alerted claim owners about which documents to present, which questions to raise, which legal points to challenge. The colonel's legal experts are starting to argue among themselves, Thomas Wu reported after making his morning deliveries. They can't agree on which documents take precedence or which jurisdiction has actual authority. Stone's network continued implementing their carefully coordinated response. Maria Suarez's boarding house became a center for legal discussions, where carefully placed guests raised specific questions about territorial mining law. Reverend Parker organized community meetings that presented more challenges to the colonel's authority. Through his observation system, Stone watched the colonel's operation, becoming increasingly entangled in its own complexity. Men trained for military action were forced to handle increasingly sophisticated legal and bureaucratic challenges. Each attempt to assert authority only revealed more contradictions in their documentation. They're requesting additional legal experts from Denver, Catherine Henderson reported from her telegraph office. But I've made sure those messages are delayed by technical difficulties. The confrontation reached a crucial point at the bank, where the colonel's men attempted to access financial records that would support their claims. Foster's carefully prepared documentation created new complications. Each transaction they investigated led to more questions about ownership, rights, and authority. Stone's strategic mind had anticipated this development. By forcing the colonel's operation to engage on legal and bureaucratic grounds, he prevented them from using their military strength effectively. Each hour spent investigating documents was an hour they couldn't spend consolidating control. Through carefully hidden observation ports, he watched the colonel's frustration building. The military commander had expected to overwhelm resistance through official authority, backed by armed force. Instead, he found his men drowning in paperwork, challenged by legal questions, and confronted with endless bureaucratic complications. They're starting to look uncertain, Rebecca signaled from her post. The men carrying out evictions keep having to check with their superiors about how to handle new documents. Stone's network continued pressing their advantage. Mrs. Chen's coded messages, sewn into mended uniforms, spread specific instructions throughout the resistance. Henderson's livery stable provided carefully selected horses that subtly hindered the colonel's men's mobility. Even the local saloon served a purpose, as retired scouts posing as drunk miners raised carefully crafted questions about claim boundaries. The confrontation's turning point came when the colonel himself attempted to address a gathering of claim owners. Through his mirror system, Stone watched the military commander trying to assert his authority over increasingly skeptical miners. By territorial law, the colonel began, but immediately faced a barrage of specific legal questions that his own documents couldn't consistently answer. Each response he gave contradicted some element of his previous claims, creating more doubt about his legitimate authority. Stone's strategy had transformed what should have been a simple show of force into an increasingly complex legal and administrative nightmare. The colonel's men, trained for direct action, found themselves paralyzed by the very official procedures they were trying to use. Through the afternoon, the confrontation continued, escalating in complexity. Miguel Martinez's miners presented more historical documents. Wong Chen's people raised new questions about traditional rights. Foster's banking records revealed more contradictions. Each new challenge forced the colonel's operation to engage in exactly the kind of bureaucratic warfare they were least prepared to handle. "They're starting to withdraw from some claims," Sarah reported as evening approached, not admitting defeat, but claiming they need to review additional documentation before proceeding. Stone's network had achieved their first major victory, not through force, but through sophisticated legal and bureaucratic resistance. The quiet prospector had demonstrated that some battles could be won without firing a shot, using the very systems of official authority that the colonel had tried to exploit. As darkness settled over Shadow Pine, Stone observed the day's impact through his surveillance system. The colonel's men, so confident in their military precision, had been forced to retreat in the face of carefully coordinated bureaucratic opposition. Their attempt to use official authority as a weapon had been turned against them through precise application of legal and administrative complexity. The first major confrontation had revealed crucial weaknesses in the colonel's operation. His men were trained for direct action, not complex legal maneuvering. Their very professionalism made them vulnerable to sophisticated bureaucratic resistance. Most importantly, their attempt to maintain a facade of official authority had given Stone's network perfect opportunities to undermine their legitimacy through careful manipulation of documentation and procedure. As evening approached, Stone observed a new dimension to the confrontation unfolding. Through his mirror system, he watched the colonel's men discovering another layer of complications. The town's deed registry, which they had planned to use as definitive proof of ownership, had its own peculiarities. "Show them the flood records," Stone instructed Foster. The banker produced documentation about a flash flood 5 years ago that had damaged the original registry. The replacement records, while official, contained subtle discrepancies that raised questions about every major claim transfer since then. "They've spent 3 hours just trying to verify the Martinez family's ownership history," Sarah reported. "Watching through concealed observation ports, every document they check leads to 3 more that need verification." Stone's strategic mind had anticipated this phase of the confrontation. The colonel's men, frustrated by bureaucratic resistance, would likely push harder for immediate resolution. This pressure would only lead them deeper into the web of carefully prepared complications. Through his surveillance network, Stone watched new developments at the assayer's office. The colonel's legal experts, attempting to establish clear production values for each claim, encountered carefully structured irregularities in the testing records. "Most interesting," the head assayer commented innocently. "These samples show significantly different mineral content than the official records. We should probably retest everything to ensure accuracy." This triggered another aspect of Stone's strategy. Professional thoroughness would require the colonel's operation to halt all claim seizures until accurate values could be established. Each test would reveal discrepancies that required further investigation. Rebecca's signal mirror flashed urgent news from her observation post. "They're trying to bypass the legal complications by asserting emergency authority over water rights." But Stone had prepared for this move as well. Through their hidden communication system, he activated the next phase of resistance. Miguel Martinez's miners began implementing traditional water management techniques that subtly altered flow patterns throughout the district. "Most peculiar," Martinez observed to the colonel's frustrated surveyors. The water table seems unstable, perhaps related to old Spanish mining tunnels, very dangerous to make any changes without a complete geological survey. Through carefully positioned mirrors, Stone watched the colonel's reaction to mounting complications. The military commander had expected to overwhelm resistance through official authority and armed presence. Instead, his men found themselves tangled in increasingly complex technical and administrative challenges. Their legal experts are requesting additional documentation from 3 different territorial offices, Catherine Henderson reported from her telegraph position. Each request is carefully delayed by technical difficulties in transmission. The mere confrontation shifted to a new level when the colonel's men attempted to assert control over transportation routes, but Stone's network had prepared for this as well. Henderson's livery stable presented complex questions about grazing rights and access agreements that affected every major trail. "Can't move freight without proper grazing arrangements," Henderson explained patiently to increasingly frustrated officers. "Every route requires specific agreements with multiple property owners, all properly documented, of course." Stone's Treasury Department experience had taught him that complex operations were most vulnerable at points of apparent strength. The colonel's attempt to maintain legitimate authority had created perfect opportunities for sophisticated administrative resistance. As night settled over Shadow Pine, Stone observed the full impact of the day's confrontation. The colonel's operation, designed for swift and decisive action, had been systematically entangled in bureaucratic complexity. Each attempt to assert authority had been met with perfectly legitimate obstacles that required time-consuming investigation. The quiet prospector had indeed won the first major confrontation, not through force, but through careful manipulation of administrative and legal procedures. His network had demonstrated that sophisticated resistance could effectively counter military precision by turning official authority against itself. The colonel's escalation began not with violence, but with a sophisticated change in tactics. Through his mirror system, Stone observed teams of men arriving before dawn, not soldiers this time, but professional surveyors, geologists, and mining engineers. Each carried advanced equipment and official credentials from prestigious Eastern institutions. "They're establishing a scientific command post in the old assay office," Sarah Wu reported, her voice tense. "These aren't military men pretending to be experts. They're actual specialists brought in to legitimize the operation." Stone's strategic mind recognized this as a dangerous development. The colonel was adapting, shifting from military authority to technical expertise. Each expert brought legitimate credentials that couldn't easily be questioned through bureaucratic means. Through carefully positioned observation points, he watched the new operation taking shape. The surveyors began systematic measurements using advanced theodolites and precision instruments. The geologists collected core samples and conducted professional analysis. The mining engineers evaluated structural integrity with scientific thoroughness. "They're building a technical case for condemning specific claims," Rebecca signaled from her post, "using safety concerns and geological instability as justification for immediate seizure." Stone gathered his core team in their hidden command center. The colonel's escalation required a more sophisticated response than simple administrative obstruction. These experts couldn't be confused by paperwork. They would need to be countered with equally legitimate technical challenges. "Implement the geological gambit," he instructed Miguel Martinez. The old miners' people began subtly activating preparations they'd made months ago, carefully engineered to create specific technical complications. Through his surveillance network, Stone watched the first phase unfold. As the colonel's geologists conducted their surveys, they encountered carefully prepared anomalies. Underground water flows shifted mysteriously. Soil samples showed inexplicable contamination. Rock formations displayed unusual stress patterns. Most concerning, the lead geologist announced, examining test results. These readings suggest potential subsidence throughout the entire district. We'll need comprehensive surveys before any major operations can proceed safely. Stone's Treasury Department experience had taught him that technical expertise could be turned against itself. Each scientific investigation his network triggered would require more extensive testing, more detailed analysis, more time-consuming documentation. The mining engineers are requesting additional equipment, Thomas Wu reported after his morning deliveries. They say the structural integrity issues are more complex than initially assessed. Through carefully hidden observation, Stone watched the colonel's frustration mounting. His attempt to legitimize the takeover through scientific authority was creating new complications. Each expert's professional thoroughness demanded extensive investigation before action could be taken. Sarah brought fresh intelligence from town. The surveyors had discovered discrepancies between magnetic and astronomical observations, forcing them to recalculate every measurement. The geologists found mysterious mineral deposits that required specialized analysis. The mining engineers encountered structural anomalies that defied standard assessment. Stone's network continued implementing their coordinated response. Wang Chen's people introduced traditional Chinese mining techniques that confused Western engineering assumptions. Martinez's miners demonstrated indigenous methods that challenged conventional geological understanding. Even Henderson's livery stable contributed, as carefully placed excavations by horses created soil compression patterns that required investigation. "They're bringing in more specialists," Rebecca signaled. "Hydrologists, mineralogists, structural engineers, each one adding new layers of technical complexity." Through his mirror system, Stone observed the colonel's operation becoming entangled in scientific precision. The experts, bound by professional standards, couldn't ignore anomalies that might affect safety or stability. Each investigation revealed new complications that required further study. The escalation reached a new level when the colonel attempted to assert emergency authority based on technical findings. But Stone had prepared for this as well. Jacob Foster produced geological surveys from 3 different companies, each legitimate but showing contradictory results that would require reconciliation before any action could be justified. "Their own professional standards are working against them," Sarah noted, watching through concealed positions. Each expert insists on absolute certainty before making recommendations that could affect safety. Stone's strategic mind had anticipated this reaction. By creating technical anomalies that required investigation, his network was using the experts' professional thoroughness to prevent decisive action. Each specialist's insistence on complete analysis further delayed the colonel's plans. Through carefully coordinated movements, Stone's network continued introducing new complications. Elizabeth Carson's schoolchildren played games that mysteriously affected soil compression readings. Maria Suarez's boarding house guests discussed technical theories that raised new questions. Even Reverend Parker contributed, as church bell vibrations created unexplainable seismic patterns. "The experts are starting to disagree about fundamental assessments," Thomas reported after observing their latest meeting. "Each one interprets the data differently based on their specialized perspective." Stone watched through his surveillance system as the colonel's sophisticated escalation became increasingly tangled in technical complexity. The very expertise he'd brought in to legitimize his operation was now preventing quick action. Professional thoroughness demanded complete understanding before proceeding. Catherine Henderson's telegrams carried seemingly innocent technical inquiries to other mining districts, each designed to raise new questions that required investigation. The Wu family store supplied equipment that subtly affected measurements. Martinez's miners demonstrated traditional techniques that challenged scientific assumptions. The escalation's turning point came when the Colonel's experts presented their initial findings. Through his mirror system, Stone observed the military commander's growing frustration as each specialist insisted on further investigation before making definitive recommendations. The geological anomalies could indicate serious stability issues, the lead geologist explained. We can't responsibly approve any major operations without extensive core sampling and seismic analysis. These structural patterns are highly unusual, the chief engineer added. Standard assessment methods may not be applicable. We need to develop new testing protocols. The survey discrepancies exceed normal margins of error, the head surveyor concluded. Every measurement must be independently verified using multiple methods. Stone's network had transformed the Colonel's attempt at scientific legitimacy into a technical quagmire. Each expert's professional integrity demanded thorough investigation of anomalies that Stone's people had carefully engineered. The very precision that made these specialists valuable now prevented them from providing the quick justification the Colonel needed. Through the gathering darkness, Stone observed the impact of this escalation phase. The Colonel had attempted to overcome administrative resistance through technical authority, but found himself facing an even more effective form of obstruction. Scientific expertise, bound by professional standards, couldn't ignore anomalies that might affect safety or stability. As night settled over Shadow Pine, the quiet prospector reviewed the day's developments with his core team. The Colonel's sophisticated escalation had been met with equally sophisticated resistance. His attempt to use technical expertise as a weapon had been turned against him through careful manipulation of scientific investigation and professional thoroughness. Stone's strategic mind recognized that this phase of the conflict had revealed crucial information about their opponent. The Colonel's willingness to bring in legitimate experts showed both his resources and his determination to maintain an appearance of authority. But this same sophistication created vulnerabilities that Stone's network could systematically exploit. The escalation had shifted the conflict to a new level, but not in the way the Colonel intended. Instead of overwhelming resistance through technical authority, he found his operation increasingly entangled in scientific complexity. Each expert's insistence on professional thoroughness further delayed his plans while revealing more about his methods and capabilities. Through his mirror system, Stone observed another dimension of the escalation unfolding. The Colonel had brought in financial experts from Denver banks, attempting to assert control through economic pressure. But this too played into carefully laid preparations. "Show them the partnership agreements," Stone instructed Foster. The banker produced complex documents showing how most major claims were actually held by intricate networks of investors, each arrangement requiring separate legal and financial review. "The auditors have discovered discrepancies in the production reports," Sarah reported, watching through concealed positions. "Every high-value claim shows different output figures in different records, all technically correct but impossible to reconcile quickly." Stone's network activated another layer of resistance. Wang Chen revealed traditional accounting methods that confused Western financial experts. Martinez's miners demonstrated value calculation systems based on pre-war Spanish practices. Each legitimate but unfamiliar method required extensive investigation. Through carefully positioned observation ports, Stone watched the Colonel's financial experts becoming entangled in their own expertise. Professional thoroughness demanded they investigate every discrepancy, verify every calculation, validate every valuation method. "They're requesting additional auditors," Catherine Henderson signaled from her telegraph office. "The financial complexity exceeds their initial assessment capabilities. The escalation took another turn as the colonel brought in legal specialists to untangle the growing complications. But Stone's preparations had anticipated this as well. The Wu family store produced ancient land grant documents. Henderson's livery stable revealed complex grazing rights agreements. Every claim presented unique legal challenges that required extensive research. Their own professional standards are paralyzing them, Rebecca noted from her observation post. Each expert insists on complete verification before making recommendations, but every investigation reveals new layers of complexity. Stone's strategic mind had recognized that sophisticated opponents were often most vulnerable to their own expertise. The colonel's attempt to legitimize his takeover through professional authority had created perfect opportunities for technically sophisticated resistance. As night deepened over Shadowpine, the quiet prospector observed how escalation had transformed. The conflict, what began as a military operation, had evolved into a complex battle of expertise, where professional thoroughness proved more effective than force in preventing decisive action. The colonel's strategic shift became apparent at midnight, when his men began dismantling their visible operation. Through his mirror system, Stone watched them withdrawing from obvious positions, removing guards from public locations, and apparently reducing their presence throughout Shadowpine. "They're not leaving," Sarah Wu observed from her concealed position. "They're transforming their approach. Small teams moving in civilian clothes, setting up observation posts in rented rooms, establishing cover identities as ordinary miners and merchants." Stone's strategic mind recognized this adaptation. The colonel was shifting from overt control to subtle infiltration, attempting to gather intelligence and influence events from within the community itself. It was a sophisticated change that required an equally sophisticated response. "Implement the Shadow Protocol," Stone instructed his network. This triggered a carefully prepared series of countermeasures designed to deal with covert operations. Through carefully positioned observation points, he watched his people begin their adapted response. Elizabeth Carson's schoolchildren modified their games, creating new patterns that would identify strangers attempting to blend into the community. Maria Suarez adjusted her boarding house operations, using seating arrangements and conversation groups to isolate potential infiltrators. "The colonel's men are attempting to establish business relationships," Thomas reported after his morning deliveries, offering partnerships, suggesting joint ventures, proposing shared equipment arrangements. This revealed another dimension of the adapted strategy. Instead of direct takeover, the colonel's operation was now attempting to gain control through legitimate-appearing business relationships. Each proposal seemed reasonable on the surface, but contained carefully crafted terms that would gradually transfer actual authority. Stone's network implemented their counter-adaptation. Jacob Foster began introducing subtle complications into every business arrangement. Wang Chen demonstrated traditional partnership structures that required extensive negotiation. Martinez's miners shared complex profit-sharing arrangements based on pre-war Spanish practices. "They're trying to map our communication network," Rebecca signaled from her observation post. Small teams watching delivery routes, monitoring social interactions, tracking regular meetings. Through his surveillance system, Stone observed the colonel's adapted operation taking shape. His men were now operating in layers, some maintaining visible positions, while others worked covertly to understand and infiltrate the community's actual power structure. "Show them what they expect to see," Stone instructed his core team. This initiated another phase of their adapted strategy. The Wu family store began conducting obvious secret meetings that actually provided cover for real communications happening elsewhere. Henderson's livery stable created visible patterns of movement that disguised actual transportation routes. Catherine Henderson's role became crucial in this adapted phase. Her telegraph office now sent multiple layers of messages. Some meant to be intercepted, others carrying actual intelligence, each designed to create specific impressions about the resistance network's structure and capabilities. "They're establishing alternative supply lines," Sarah reported, watching through concealed positions. Small shipments coming in through multiple routes, each appearing independent but actually coordinated. Stone's Treasury Department experience had taught him that sophisticated opponents required sophisticated countermeasures. The Colonel's adaptation to subtle infiltration created new vulnerabilities that could be exploited through careful manipulation of appearances and expectations. Through carefully hidden observation ports, Stone watched both sides adapting their strategies. The Colonel's men were learning to operate less visibly, but this very subtlety made them more dependent on accurate intelligence. Each attempt to gather information could be used to feed them carefully crafted misconceptions. "Their business experts are trying to map our economic networks," Foster reported during a secure meeting. "Examining transaction patterns, tracking supply relationships, analyzing financial connections." Stone's network implemented another layer of their adapted response. Every business relationship now generates multiple patterns, some visible, some hidden, all designed to create specific impressions about the community's actual structure. The Colonel's experts would find exactly what Stone wanted them to see. "They're bringing in social specialists," Thomas added after observing recent arrivals. "People trained to understand community relationships and power structures." This adaptation required an equally sophisticated response. Maria Suarez modified her boarding house operations to present carefully crafted social patterns. Reverend Parker adjusted church activities to suggest specific community relationships. Even the local saloon contributed, as apparently drunk miners shared carefully prepared stories about local politics and alliances. Through his mirror system, Stone observed the impact of these adapted strategies. The Colonel's operation, attempting to gain deeper understanding of Shadowpine's actual power structure, found themselves analyzing layers of carefully constructed appearances. Each piece of intelligence they gathered led them further from accurate understanding. "Their mapping of our communication network is becoming more sophisticated," Rebecca signaled. "They're tracking multiple patterns of interaction, trying to identify key nodes and connections." Stone's strategic mind had anticipated this development. His network now operated on multiple levels, some visible, some hidden, all designed to create specific impressions. The Colonel's men, attempting to understand these patterns, would find themselves pursuing carefully crafted illusions. The adaptation reached a new level when the Colonel's operation began attempting to influence community decisions through seemingly legitimate channels. His men joined local organizations, contributed to community projects, and participated in public meetings. Each involvement appeared natural, but was actually part of a coordinated effort to gain control from within. Stone's network responded with equal sophistication. Every organization now operated on multiple levels, presenting different faces to different observers. Public meetings conducted obvious business, while real decisions happened through subtle signals and coded interactions. Community projects served as cover for resistance activities. "They're trying to identify our leadership structure," Sarah reported after observing a series of careful investigations, "looking for patterns of authority and decision-making." Through carefully positioned observation points, Stone watched both sides evolving their strategies. The Colonel's operation had adapted from direct control to subtle infiltration, but this very sophistication made them vulnerable to carefully managed perceptions. Each attempt to understand Shadowpine's actual power structure led them deeper into a web of calculated appearances. As evening approached, Stone gathered his core team to review their adapted strategies. The quiet prospectors network had transformed from simple resistance to sophisticated counterintelligence. Every aspect of community life now served multiple purposes, some visible, some hidden, all carefully designed to control what the Colonel's operation would learn about Shadow Pine's true nature. The strategic adaptation had shifted the conflict to an entirely new level. Instead of direct confrontation, both sides now engaged in a complex dance of appearance and reality. The Colonel's attempt to gain control through subtle infiltration had been met with equally subtle manipulation of perception and understanding. Through the gathering darkness, Stone observed how thoroughly both sides had adapted their approaches. What began as a military operation had evolved into something far more sophisticated, a battle of intelligence and counterintelligence where success depended not on force, but on controlling what the opponent believed they understood about the situation. Stone's network revealed another layer of adaptation as the Colonel's operation attempted to establish a cultural presence in Shadow Pine. Through his mirror system, he watched them organizing community events, sponsoring local celebrations, and attempting to build social connections. They're trying to create legitimate influence through public benefaction, Sarah reported, offering to fund improvements to the school, promising new equipment for the fire brigade, suggesting renovations to the church. But Stone had prepared for this development as well. Each community organization now operated with subtle complexity. Acceptance of apparent benefits came with carefully crafted conditions that actually limited the Colonel's influence while appearing to welcome it. Let them build their connections, Stone instructed his team, but ensure each relationship creates obligations that work in our favor. Through carefully positioned observation ports, he watched this sophisticated game unfold. The Colonels, men attempting to establish social authority, found themselves increasingly bound by the very community ties they sought to create. "They're adapting their intelligence gathering," Rebecca signaled from her post. "Using social events to map relationships, community meetings to identify influence patterns, public gatherings to track alliances." Stone's strategic mind recognized this as another opportunity. His network began implementing more complex social patterns. Every public event now carried multiple layers of meaning, some obvious, some subtle, all carefully designed to create specific impressions about Shadow Pine's actual power structure. Their cultural specialists are analyzing local customs, Thomas reported after observing recent investigations, trying to understand how community decisions are really made, how influence actually flows. This prompted another adaptation in Stone's network. Wangzhen's people demonstrated traditional ceremonies that suggested specific authority patterns. Martinez's miners shared cultural practices that implied particular leadership structures. Each revelation was carefully crafted to create calculated impressions about the community's true nature. Through his surveillance system, Stone observed both sides evolving their approaches with increasing sophistication. The battle for control of Shadow Pine had transformed from direct confrontation to subtle manipulation of perception and understanding, where every action carried multiple meanings and every relationship served multiple purposes. The quiet prospectors network had indeed adapted their strategy to meet this new challenge, transforming ordinary community life into a complex instrument of resistance that worked through influence and perception rather than force or direct opposition. The tide began to turn at dawn, though not through any single traumatic event. Through his mirror system, Stone observed subtle but significant changes in the Colonel's operation. His men's movements showed increasing hesitation. Their decisions required longer consultation. Their actions revealed growing uncertainty. They're starting to doubt their own intelligence, Sarah Wu reported from her observation post. Every pattern they think they've identified leads to contradictions. Every relationship they believe they understand proves more complex than expected. Stone's network had achieved something more powerful than simple resistance. They'd created systematic uncertainty that affected every aspect of the Colonel's operation. Each attempt to gain control only revealed more layers of complexity that required investigation. Through carefully positioned observation ports, he watched the momentum shifting. The Colonel's men, trying to maintain their cover as ordinary miners and merchants, found themselves increasingly isolated. Every business relationship they established led to complications they couldn't easily resolve. Their social specialists are becoming frustrated, Thomas reported after his morning deliveries. They can't reconcile the different versions of community structure they're seeing. Each investigation reveals new patterns that contradict their previous understanding. This revealed how thoroughly Stone's strategy had affected the operation. The Colonel's experts, trained to analyze and control communities, found themselves unable to establish a clear picture of how Shadowpine actually functioned. Every apparent insight led to more questions rather than answers. Implement the acceleration protocol, Stone instructed his core team. This triggered a new phase of their operation, designed to exploit the growing confusion among the Colonel's men. Jacob Foster began introducing more sophisticated financial complications. Simple business transactions now generated complex questions about ownership and authority. Each attempt to trace assets or verify values led to carefully crafted dead ends. Their economic experts are requesting additional support, Rebecca signaled from her position. They say Shadowpine's financial structure is unlike anything they've encountered before. Through his surveillance network, Stone watched the impact building. The Colonel's operation, designed to gain control through subtle infiltration, found itself increasingly entangled in webs of relationships and obligations they couldn't fully understand or control. Wang Chen's people added another layer of complexity by demonstrating traditional business practices that confused Western assumptions. Martinez's miners introduced pre-war Spanish methods that required extensive investigation. Each legitimate but unfamiliar system created more questions that demanded resolution. They're starting to work against each other, Sarah observed through concealed positions. Different teams interpret the same information in contradictory ways, arguing about what patterns are actually significant. Stone's Treasury Department experience had taught him that sophisticated operations were most vulnerable when their own expertise began working against them. The Colonel's insistence on thorough understanding before action had become a paralyzing weakness. Through carefully hidden observation ports, Stone watched momentum building in his network's favor. Maria Suarez's boarding house became a center for spreading carefully crafted impressions. Henderson's livery stable created movement patterns that suggested specific but misleading conclusions. Even Reverend Parker's church activities contributed to the growing confusion. Their attempt to map our communication network has backfired, Catherine Henderson reported from her telegraph office. They've identified so many different patterns that they can't determine which ones actually matter. The quiet prospector's strategy had transformed Shadowpine into something the Colonel's operation couldn't effectively analyze or control. Every aspect of community life now generated multiple layers of meaning, each carefully designed to create specific but ultimately misleading impressions. Show them the mineral surveys, Stone instructed Foster. The banker produced a series of legitimate but contradictory reports about claim values and production potential. Each document raised questions that required investigation. Each investigation revealed new complications that demanded resolution. Through his mirror system, Stone observed the Colonel's growing frustration. His men, trained for decisive action, found themselves paralyzed by uncertainty about basic facts. Every attempt to establish clear understanding only revealed more layers of complexity they couldn't ignore. Their geological experts are now questioning their initial assessments, Thomas reported. The rock formations don't behave according to standard models. Water patterns don't follow expected flows. Even basic surveys show unexplainable discrepancies. Stone's network continued building momentum through careful coordination. Elizabeth Carson's schoolchildren created new games that suggested specific community patterns. The Wu family store generated transaction records that implied particular relationships. Martinez's miners demonstrated techniques that indicated special knowledge. Through carefully positioned observation points, Stone watched the Colonel's operation struggling to maintain coherence. Different teams interpreted the same information in contradictory ways. Experts argued about basic assumptions. Even simple facts seemed to change meaning depending on context. "They're starting to suspect deliberate manipulation," Rebecca signaled, "but they can't determine which patterns are genuine and which are manufactured. Every attempt to verify information just creates more uncertainty." This revealed how thoroughly Stone's strategy had affected the operation. The Colonel's men, trying to maintain professional standards, couldn't ignore the mounting complications. Each attempt to resolve confusion only generated more questions that required investigation. Sarah brought fresh intelligence from town. The Colonel's social specialists were now arguing about fundamental aspects of Shadow Pine's structure. His financial experts couldn't agree on basic valuations. His technical teams disputed essential facts about the district's geology and mining potential. Through the gathering darkness, Stone observed momentum building inexorably against the Colonel's operation. What began as an attempt to gain control through subtle infiltration had transformed into a paralyzing tangle of uncertainty and contradiction. "Their command structure is showing strain," Catherine reported, after monitoring communications. "Different teams request conflicting actions. Experts propose contradictory solutions. Even basic decisions require extensive consultation." Stone's strategic mind had recognized that sophisticated opponents were often most vulnerable to their own expertise. The Colonel's insistence on thorough understanding had become a weakness that Stone's network systematically exploited through careful manipulation of information and perception. As night settled over Shadow Pine, the quiet prospector reviewed his network's progress with growing satisfaction. They had achieved something more powerful than simple resistance. They had created an environment where the Colonel's very sophistication worked against him. Through carefully coordinated actions, Stone's people continued building momentum. Each apparently normal activity generated multiple layers of meaning. Every business transaction created new complications. All social interactions suggested patterns that required investigation. The Colonel's operation, designed for precise action based on clear understanding, found itself increasingly paralyzed by uncertainty about basic facts and relationships. Their attempt to gain control through subtle infiltration had been transformed into a paralyzing maze of contradictions they couldn't ignore or resolve. Through his mirror system, Stone observed a new dimension of momentum building. The Colonel's men, frustrated by their inability to gain clear understanding, began attempting more aggressive investigation. But this only played into carefully prepared complications. "They're trying to pressure local merchants for information," Sarah reported. "But each business they investigate reveals connections to others, creating an endless chain of relationships that require verification." Stone's network activated another layer of their strategy. The Wu family store produced complex partnership agreements that suggested specific patterns of ownership. Henderson's livery stable revealed transportation arrangements that implied particular business relationships. Each revelation led to more questions that demanded investigation. Their financial experts are becoming overwhelmed, Foster reported. During a secure meeting, every transaction they trace branches into multiple directions. Each ownership record they verify contradicts others that seem equally valid. Through carefully positioned observation ports, Stone watched this momentum building. The Colonel's operation, attempting to force clarity through intensive investigation, found itself drowning in legitimate but contradictory information. Each aggressive push for answers only revealed more layers of complexity. Show them the water. Writes documentation, Stone instructed Martinez. The old miner produced records demonstrating how every major claim's water access was intricately connected to others through traditional agreements and historical usage patterns. The Colonel's men, already struggling with uncertainty about basic facts, now faced questions about fundamental resources. Every attempt to establish clear control over water rights revealed new complications that couldn't be ignored or easily resolved. Through his surveillance network, Stone observed how this building momentum affected the Colonel's operation at every level. Professional experts questioned their own conclusions. Experienced investigators doubted their findings. Even military men hesitated to act without clearer understanding. The quiet prospector's strategy had indeed transformed confusion into paralysis, uncertainty into ineffectiveness, creating momentum that worked inexorably against attempted control through accumulated complications and contradictions. The Colonel's desperation manifested at midnight, when his operation suddenly abandoned all pretense of legitimacy. Through his mirror system, Stone watched armed men emerging from their cover positions, dropping their civilian disguises and taking direct control of key locations throughout Shadowpine. They're securing the assay office and bank with military precision, Sarah Wu reported urgently. No more attempts at subtle infiltration. This is open force backed by threatening displays of weapons. Stone's strategic mind had anticipated this development. Sophisticated opponents, when frustrated by inability to achieve control through subtle means, often reverted to crude force. But this desperate shift created new vulnerabilities his network could exploit. Through carefully positioned observation ports, he watched the Colonel's operation transformation. Professional experts were replaced by armed enforcers. Careful investigation gave way to direct intimidation. Complex manipulation surrendered to simple threats. They're demanding immediate access to all claim documentation, Thomas reported, after witnessing confrontations at several locations. No more careful analysis. They're trying to seize records through brute force. But Stone's network had prepared for this phase as well. Foster's banking records, Wong Chen's claim documents, Martinez's water rights agreements, all crucial papers, had been carefully distributed through multiple hidden locations. The Colonel's men found themselves trying to gather scattered pieces of a puzzle they couldn't complete through force alone. Implement the dissolution protocol, Stone instructed his core team. This triggered carefully prepared responses designed to exploit the weaknesses inherent in desperate actions. Through his surveillance system, he watched his network's coordinated reaction unfolding. Rebecca's observation posts tracked the Colonel's, men attempting to establish physical control over Shadowpine, but their very visibility made their movements predictable, their actions obvious, their intentions clear. They're trying to intimidate the Chinese miners, Sarah reported from her concealed position. But Wong Chen's people have already relocated crucial operations to hidden locations. The Colonel's men are securing empty buildings and abandoned workings. Stone's Treasury Department experience had taught him that desperate opponents often sacrifice strategic advantage for immediate tactical satisfaction. The Colonel's shift to open force revealed his frustration, but it also exposed his operation to more effective resistance. Their command structure is breaking down, Catherine Henderson signaled after monitoring communications. Different groups acting independently, no coordination between teams, confusion about priorities and objectives. Through carefully hidden observation ports, Stone watched the colonel's desperate move, creating systematic problems for his own operation. Armed men, expecting to overwhelm resistance through force, found themselves facing an opponent they couldn't effectively engage. "Show them the consequences of their actions," Stone instructed his network. This initiated another phase of their response. Martinez's miners demonstrated how aggressive enforcement disrupted crucial maintenance of underground workings. Henderson's livery stable revealed how military occupation prevented essential supply operations. The colonel's men, focused on immediate control, failed to recognize how their own actions were creating mounting problems. Each show of force generated new complications that couldn't be resolved through simple intimidation. They're discovering the practical problems of their approach, Rebecca signaled from her post. Armed men can't maintain complex mining operations. Military occupation doesn't preserve essential infrastructure. Force alone can't sustain a mining district. Through his mirror system, Stone observed the colonel's desperate move, backfiring systematically. His men secured buildings but couldn't access crucial documents. They controlled streets but couldn't maintain necessary services. They established visible authority but couldn't exercise effective control. The community's natural resistance is becoming apparent, Sarah reported after observing multiple interactions. Miners work slower, equipment develops problems, supplies become scarce. Not obvious opposition, just the passive resistance of people facing unwanted occupation. Stone's network continued implementing their carefully prepared response. The Wu family store demonstrated how military control disrupted normal business operations. Maria Suarez's boarding house showed how armed occupation affected essential services. Even Reverend Parker's church activities revealed how force damaged necessary community functions. Through the gathering darkness, Stone watched the colonel's desperation growing. His operation, designed for sophisticated control, had been reduced to crude intimidation. But this very desperation created opportunities that Stone's network systematically exploited. "Their experts are protesting the new approach," Thomas reported after observing heated arguments. "The geologists warn that aggressive enforcement endangers mining safety. Engineers predict equipment failures without proper maintenance. Financial specialists forecast economic collapse under military occupation." Stone's strategic mind recognized this phase as crucial. The colonel's desperate move had abandoned the very expertise that gave his operation legitimacy. Each professional who objected to crude force created more doubt about his authority. "Let them see the full impact," Stone instructed his team. This triggered another layer of their response. Foster documented how military occupation disrupted essential banking operations. Wang Chen demonstrated how aggressive enforcement damaged valuable claims. Martinez showed how armed control prevented necessary maintenance. Through carefully positioned observation ports, Stone watched the colonel's operation struggling with consequences of its own desperate actions. Armed men couldn't maintain complex mining operations. Military control couldn't sustain essential services. Force alone couldn't preserve valuable resources. Their own people are beginning to question orders, Rebecca signaled. Professional experts refuse to support dangerous actions. Technical specialists won't endorse unsafe operations. Even military men express doubts about damaging valuable assets. The colonel's desperate move had indeed created opportunities Stone's network could exploit. Each show of force generated problems that couldn't be solved through intimidation. Every aggressive action produced consequences that damaged the colonel's own interests. As dawn approached, Stone observed the full impact of this phase through his surveillance system. The colonel's operation, abandoning sophisticated control for crude force, found itself facing resistance it couldn't effectively counter. Armed men could secure buildings, but couldn't maintain essential functions. Military occupation could establish authority, but couldn't preserve necessary operations. Stone's network continued implementing their careful response to desperate actions. Each aggressive move by the colonel's men generated new complications they couldn't resolve through force. Every attempt at intimidation created problems that undermined their own control. The quiet prospector had indeed prepared for this phase of the conflict. His network's response demonstrated that some forms of resistance couldn't be overcome through desperate measures. The colonel was about to discover that force alone couldn't secure victory in a battle that required sophisticated understanding and careful maintenance of complex operations. Through his mirror system, Stone observed a new dimension of the colonel's desperation unfolding. His men began attempting to force experienced miners to operate complex equipment, leading to dangerous mistakes and near accidents. "They don't understand the consequences of their actions," Martinez reported through their secure communication system, forcing untrained men to work dangerous machinery, demanding rushed operations in unstable tunnels. They're creating disasters waiting to happen. Stone's network activated another layer of their response. The experienced miners began subtle sabotage disguised as technical difficulties. Equipment developed mysterious problems that required specialized knowledge to fix. Critical machinery showed signs of wear that only trained operators could address. "Their frustration is making them reckless," Sarah observed from her hidden position. "They're threatening to blast new tunnels without proper surveys, trying to pump flooded shafts without safety measures, and attempting to move heavy equipment through unstable ground." Through carefully positioned observation ports, Stone watched this desperate phase, creating mounting problems. The colonel's men, attempting to maintain their image of control, found themselves facing technical challenges they couldn't solve through intimidation. "Show them the safety reports," Stone instructed Foster. The banker produced detailed documentation about previous mining disasters caused by rushed operations and ignored safety procedures. Each report raised serious questions about liability and responsibility that even armed men couldn't dismiss. The colonel's desperation reached new levels as his operation encountered the practical limitations of force. Armed men could threaten miners, but couldn't make them work efficiently. Military control could demand production, but couldn't maintain safe operations. Intimidation could secure buildings, but couldn't preserve valuable resources. Through his surveillance network, Stone observed how thoroughly the colonel's desperate move had undermined his own position. Professional experts openly questioned dangerous orders. Technical specialists refused to endorse unsafe practices. Even loyal men hesitated to carry out instructions that might trigger disasters. The quiet prospector's preparation had indeed created perfect counters to desperate measures, transforming the colonel's show of force into a demonstration of fundamental weakness. The colonel's desperation took an even darker turn as night deepened. Through his mirror system, Stone observed teams of men setting up explosives near crucial water control points, threatening to flood entire sections of the mining district if their demands weren't met. "They don't realize what they're risking," Catherine Henderson reported after intercepting urgent messages. "The underground water system is all connected. Damaging one section could collapse the entire network of mines." Stone's strategic mind had prepared for even this level of desperation. Through carefully maintained relationships with experienced miners, he had mapped every underground watercourse, every potential flood route, every crucial drainage point. The colonel's men, attempting to use water as a weapon, didn't understand the complex systems they were threatening. "Implement the hydrostatic protocol," Stone instructed Martinez. The old miners' people began subtle adjustments to water flow patterns throughout the district. Each change appeared natural, but systematically. reduced the effectiveness of the colonel's threats. Through carefully hidden observation ports, Stone watched the mounting tension in the colonel's operation. His technical experts, recognizing the dangers of their desperate measures, began openly arguing with military commanders. Professional engineers refused to assist with operations that might trigger catastrophic flooding. Their own men are starting to desert, Sarah reported from her concealed position. Not just workers and specialists, even armed guards are slipping away, unwilling to be part of actions that could destroy the entire district. The colonel's desperate move had indeed created perfect opportunities for Stone's network to exploit. Each escalation of threats only revealed more clearly how force alone couldn't control the complex systems that kept Shadowpine's mines operating. The quiet prospector had transformed the colonel's desperate show of strength into a decisive demonstration of weakness, proving that some battles couldn't be won through force or threats, no matter how desperate the measures employed. The final confrontation began at dawn, but not with violence. Through his mirror system, Stone watched the colonel's operation crumbling from within. His professional experts openly refused to participate in dangerous operations. His technical specialists withdrew support from unsafe procedures. Even his armed men hesitated to carry out orders that might trigger disasters. Their entire command structure is breaking down, Sarah Wu reported from her observation post. Different groups acting independently, some trying to maintain control through force, others attempting to prevent catastrophic damage to the mines. Stone's strategic mind recognized this as the perfect moment to implement his final strategy. Through carefully coordinated actions, his network began systematically exposing the full scope of the colonel's failure. Jacob Foster initiated the first phase, revealing detailed documentation about how military occupation had disrupted essential banking operations. Each report showed specific losses, carefully calculated costs, precise financial damage that force alone had caused. Through carefully positioned observation ports, Stone watched the impact of these revelations. The colonel's remaining supporters, confronted with clear evidence of mounting economic disasters, began questioning the entire operation's viability. Their own financial experts are now openly opposing further action, Thomas reported after observing heated arguments. They're calculating potential losses that would make the entire takeover worthless, even if it succeeded. Martinez's miners demonstrated how military control had compromised crucial safety systems. Wang Chen's people revealed damage to valuable claims caused by rushed operations. Each disclosure showed how force and intimidation had systematically destroyed the very resources the colonel sought to control. Implement the final protocol, Stone instructed his network. This triggered carefully prepared responses throughout Shadowpine. Every business, every operation, every activity demonstrated specific ways that military occupation had created mounting problems that force couldn't solve. Through his surveillance system, Stone observed the colonel's remaining authority dissolving. His men, faced with clear evidence of their operation's self-defeating nature, began abandoning their positions. Each withdrawal revealed more clearly how thoroughly their desperate measures had undermined their own objectives. The professional experts are now actively working against them, Rebecca signaled from her post. Engineers refuse to certify unsafe operations. Geologists won't approve dangerous excavations. Even military men won't support actions that might trigger disasters. Stone's Treasury Department experience had taught him that sophisticated opponents were often most vulnerable when forced to confront the full consequences of their own actions. The colonel's operation, designed for control through force, now faced clear evidence of how that force had systematically destroyed valuable resources. Through carefully hidden observation ports, Stone watched his network's final moves taking effect. Maria Suarez's boarding house became a center for sharing specific information about mounting damages. Henderson's livery stable demonstrated disruption to essential supply lines. Even Reverend Parker's church activities revealed community-wide impacts that force had caused. "Show them the full assessment," Stone instructed Foster. The banker produced comprehensive documentation about total losses, accumulated damages and long-term consequences. Each report had been carefully prepared to reveal exactly how military occupation had undermined the district's actual value. The colonel's remaining men, confronted with clear evidence of their operation's self-defeating nature, began withdrawing. In growing numbers, professional experts departed first, followed by technical specialists, then even armed guards unwilling to be associated with mounting disasters. Through his mirror system, Stone observed the final phase of his strategy taking effect. The colonel's operation, attempting to maintain control through force, found itself facing resistance it couldn't counter. The simple reality that their own actions had systematically destroyed what they sought to control. Their command center is emptying, Sarah reported from her concealed position. Men leaving in groups, some trying to maintain military order, others simply abandoning their posts. The colonel himself looks shocked by how completely his operation has collapsed. Stone's network continued implementing their carefully coordinated final moves. Each business demonstrated specific losses caused by military occupation. Every operation revealed particular damages that force had created. All activities showed how intimidation had generated mounting problems that couldn't be solved through threats. Through carefully positioned observation ports, Stone watched Shadow Pine's transformation beginning. As the colonel's men withdrew, the community began returning to normal operations. But this normality had been changed by recent events, shaped by lessons learned during resistance. "The miners are already implementing new safety protocols," Martinez reported, "working together to prevent the kind of dangers that military occupation tried to impose. Each claim supports others, maintaining shared systems that protect everyone's interests." Wang Chen's people demonstrated new approaches to claim management, combining traditional methods with modern techniques. Henderson's livery stable established improved supply networks based on cooperation rather than control. Every business adapted lessons learned during resistance to create better operations. Through his surveillance system, Stone observed Shadow Pine's evolution taking shape. The quiet prospector's strategy had done more than defeat military occupation. It had shown the community how shared interests and coordinated action could prevent future threats. "And they're not just rebuilding," Sarah noted, watching through concealed positions. "They're creating new systems, better procedures, stronger connections. Everyone understands how supporting others protects their own interests." Stone's strategic mind recognized this transformation as the operation's true success. His network had demonstrated that resistance to force could create positive changes, showing how communities could become stronger through coordinated response to external threats. Evening approached. Stone gathered his core team for final observations. Through carefully maintained observation points, they watched Shadow Pine becoming something new. A community that had learned crucial lessons about cooperation, coordination, and shared interests. The quiet prospector had indeed achieved more than simple victory over military force. His network had shown how sophisticated resistance could transform threats into opportunities, creating positive changes that would last long after the immediate conflict ended. Through the gathering darkness, Stone observed Shadow Pine's new patterns taking shape, miners working together to maintain safe operations, businesses supporting each other's interests. Community members understand how coordinated action protects everyone's resources. The Colonel's operation had sought control through force, but achieved something very different. Their military occupation had triggered changes they never intended, creating a community that understood how shared interests and coordinated action could prevent future threats. As night settled over Shadowpine Gorge, Stone reviewed these transformations through his surveillance system. The quiet prospector's strategy had demonstrated that some victories went beyond defeating opponents. His network had shown how resistance to force could create positive changes that strengthened entire communities. Stone's final observations revealed Shadowpine becoming something unique, a community that had learned to protect itself through cooperation rather than force, coordination rather than control, shared interests rather than military occupation. The Colonel's operation had indeed triggered lasting changes, but not the ones they intended. Through carefully positioned observation points, Stone watched these new patterns solidifying. Each business adapting lessons learned during resistance. Every operation implements improved procedures. All activities showing how coordinated action could prevent future threats. The quiet prospector had transformed military occupation into opportunity for positive change, showing how sophisticated resistance could strengthen communities while defeating those who sought control through force. Shadowpine would indeed remember recent events, not just as victory over military occupation, but as the beginning of important transformations that made the entire community stronger. 1 month later, Stone observed the lasting impacts through his mirror system. The Colonel's attempt at military occupation had unintentionally sparked innovations throughout Shadowpine. The Wu family store had evolved into a central coordination point for the district's supply network, ensuring no single operation could be isolated or controlled by outside forces. Every business now maintains multiple supply routes, Sarah reported, watching the new patterns take shape. No claim relies on single sources, no operation vulnerable to simple disruption. The whole community understands how supporting others protects everyone. Martinez's miners had developed sophisticated systems for sharing technical knowledge, combining traditional methods with modern techniques. Wang Chen's people established new approaches to water management that benefited all claims. Even Henderson's livery stable created improved transportation networks that served the entire district. Through carefully positioned observation ports, Stone watched these changes solidifying into permanent improvements. The community had learned that cooperation provided better protection than force, that coordination served everyone's interests better than control. The mining engineers are implementing new safety protocols, Thomas reported after his regular deliveries. Not just technical improvements, they're creating systems for sharing information, preventing the kind of dangers that military occupation tried to ignore. Stone's strategic mind recognized these transformations as the operation's most significant achievement. His network had demonstrated that resisting force through sophisticated means could create lasting positive changes, showing communities how to protect themselves through cooperation rather than confrontation. As spring arrived in Shadowpine Gorge, the quiet prospector observed his greatest success through carefully maintained surveillance. The community had not just defeated military occupation, it had evolved into something stronger, more resilient, better prepared for future challenges. Stone's final legacy wasn't defeating the Colonel's operation, but showing how sophisticated resistance could transform communities in ways that made them naturally resistant to control. Through force, Shadowpine had indeed changed forever, becoming an example of how coordinated action and shared interests could create lasting strength from temporary threats. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.